Good morning, everyone. I want to welcome everyone in person in the room and who's viewing online on Zoom to day 2 of our symposium, Global Perspectives on Race and Racism. We're excited to have another fantastic day of panels and education on these topics, and beginning with this question of environmental justice, which links well to our new minor program on environmental justice. So I want to introduce two great people who are joining us today via Zoom from across the country and world, both of whom have a strong connection to Trinity. One who previously taught here, another who is a graduate of Trinity. So I first want to introduce, and I'll put them up on our screen so we can all see them in person in a moment, but Schuyler Esprit, who's a scholar of Caribbean literature and cultural studies, and the founder of Create Caribbean, a project to preserve and disseminate Caribbean culture. She's actually completing her book manuscript at the moment. She's an editorial consultant for The Chronicle, which is Dominica's longest serving news publication, and she writes for regional magazines. So we'll welcome her up on screen in a moment. And then we have Margarita Vasquez, who is a graduate of the Global Affairs program here at Trinity 2 years ago in 2020. And she's drawn on her Trinity experience and her own passion for justice in her current work as a paralegal in the anti-human trafficking unit for Colorado Legal Services. And prior to joining Colorado Legal Services, she worked in the community as a health and justice organizer for a group called Toxic Free NC, whose mission is to engage North Carolina in initiatives that advance environmental health and justice by advocating for safe alternatives to harmful pesticides and chemicals. And just before we get on to our panel today, I do want to introduce another event we've got coming up here at Trinity at the end of the month. We are participating in this climate justice teach-in, where on our campus here, there's going to be a couple of really cool things. You may have heard or seen through the emails that we have planted, I don't remember how many new trees on campus. So our own Professor Patrice Nilsson is going to do a tree walk, where she'll walk the campus and talk to us about each species and the importance of trees and what they do for the environment. And you've got some other events that you'll be able to attend there in the afternoon on March 30th. I'll put this slide back up at the end of today's session in case you want to screenshot or take a picture of it as well. But without further ado, give me a moment to welcome our two speakers and go back to and launch our panels for today. So if Schuyler and Margarita can hold for just 1 minute, I just need to jump off camera and go and get you all set up here, and then we can begin. All right, Schuyler, you are all set to go. The floor is yours.
Okay, good morning, everyone. It's great to be back at Trinity after a long time. I am really excited to be here to talk about one of my favorite things, which is environmental justice in the Caribbean. And I will begin by sharing my slides. Let's see if we can pull this off today. Okay, great. I think everyone can see now. Yes. All right. So my talk for today is Alternate Caribbean Futures, bringing digital scholarship to climate justice. And I will begin by giving you a brief rundown of what I've been doing since I left Trinity. And part of that is ends in this story about Alternate Caribbean Futures, where we imagine a Caribbean that exists beyond and despite climate injustice, climate vulnerability, and climate risk in the region. Okay, let's see. All right, so at Create Caribbean Research Institute, it's the first digital humanities center in the Caribbean. When I left Trinity in 2013, I went to Dominica, where I'm from, And I worked on various projects involving literary and cultural heritage, and I was working on research for my own book and found a place that found something that I wanted to do more, which was bring together some of the things I actually learned teaching at Trinity in terms of serving predominantly minority populations. I wanted to bring together my love for literature and cultural heritage and digital humanities. And I wanted to do that for Caribbean people. And so I founded Create Caribbean in 2014. And since then it has grown to offer programs, as you can see, in digital education, technology education. We work with community partners on digital preservation, and we have an internship program with the Dominica State College, first of all, and then other colleges in the Eastern Caribbean. Our three pillars are research, technology, and community. Our work is with, the work that we do is extra academic, meaning that it includes academic research and involves digital scholarship as the methodology through which we understand and try to understand the world better. But our work serves a larger community. The students make products for students. We have a peer-to-peer environment, and the students in the internship program also teach in the camp for children ages 5 to 16. So it is quite operates quite beyond what you see in a normal academic structure, although some of the pinnings of academic work inform what we do there. And these are some of the key themes that we work on at Create Caribbean. As I mentioned before, we work with the National Youth Council quite a bit in Dominica, as well as various advocacy organizations. So it is about research, but it's also about advocacy in a lot of ways, using research for advocacy in some critical ways. This is Dominica. Dominica is located in the middle of the archipelago in the Eastern Caribbean. It is actually the largest it's the largest island with the fewest people, I believe, proportionally. We are settled all around the coast. As you can see, it's topographically, it is very tall, and most of the roadways run around the coast for a reason. Dominica is quite mountainous and has a lot of waterways. That's one of the things that we're known for, 365 rivers. And because of that, it could create some challenges for environmental stability, especially as the climate crisis worsens and we have larger, longer, heavier storms. So I just wanted to give you topographically a sense of what the country is like. Our population right now is about 78,000 people, which is quite small. Barbados has probably about twice that population, I want to say. St. Lucia has twice that population. Barbados probably three times that, just to give you a sense. And Barbados is probably a third of the size of Dominica, just giving you some proportions so you can visualize it. Most of our land, though, Dominica is known around the world for having some of the best environmental protections in the world, long before the climate crisis became a source of public conversation. About 75% of the country is natural forest reserve. We take this very seriously, and the marine life, we have quite a bit of marine protections as well, and one of the largest barrier reefs in the world. And we also have the second largest boiling lake, Crater Lake. So because of our ecosystem, it has been a topic of conversation my entire life that we take our environment seriously, and we are constantly attuned to protection. The habits and the culture of the people lend themselves to this idea of preservation and conservation. So I want to talk about a little bit of the work we've been doing in Dominica with the students in Dominica since Create Caribbean began. And I want to highlight a few of the projects that I will link in the end of the presentation so that you can look at them on your own time. Sealant is probably our largest and most successful, most kind of publicly successful project in terms of environmental work. It began with a colleague of mine, Unia Kempadu, who is a fiction writer, but she's also an environmentalist, approaching me to do a database of environmental and sustainability resources in the Caribbean in 2015. I used to organize a literary festival in Dominica, and she was a guest, and she wanted to do something on the environment, and that was the project. So we began with just a database, an Excel sheet, and decided to map it and give everyone around the region access to know what everyone else is doing, because we found that even if the Caribbean is frequently thought of as the Caribbean outside of the region, there's a lot of nationalism that allows people to operate in silos. So we wanted to create a space where environmental activists and workers could know about each other. We could know about the resources that were available. And so we first created this resource in 2015, and I wanted to do something else with it. Right after we discussed this, Tropical Storm Erica hit Dominica. I'll talk about that a little bit later. And there were many lives lost, and it became a matter of urgency for me in 2015 to do more with the students than just collect data and share it with the world. And so we created the syllabus, which is a place where the students got to do their own projects on environmental topics, ranging from environmental justice, poverty, marine life, across information preservation. We had a range of topics. I wouldn't have time to go through all of them today, but I'm welcome to talk to anybody who has interest in that. And then we also have what we call in the lab. I'm going to show you. It is our final phase of the project, and we're in our final stages of putting it together. It's going to be a 3D modeled future community that we're designing for, based on community input, that what we can look like beyond the climate crisis, right? And so this is probably our flagship project, and I wanted to highlight that. I recently, we partnered with the University of London Goldsmiths to do another research project. This is ongoing. It will wrap up this year, which was funded by the UK Research Institute, and it's called, we call it Surviving Storms. It's Caribbean Cyclone Cartography. The Create Caribbean's role in this project was to do ethnographic digital storytelling with survivors of Hurricane Maria, which took place in 2017, and to be able to document those stories against historical records of hurricanes and so on. So you will see some names here. Kayla Ann Geist is one of our interns and current staff member at Create Caribbean, and she was one of the main researchers on this project, along with the other team members. One big part of this project is to also have a great GIS component where we do hazard mapping and do future modeling for communities most at risk. So this is one of the projects that's going on there. And then this one is more personal to me. I recently gave a talk, and they asked me to put together a Zoom talk, and I was kind of tired of Zoom because this was deep in the pandemic, and I wanted to do something else. And so this project was quite personal to me, talking about gender and agriculture and the ecology of Dominica specifically. And I did it as a family history. It's called Heartland, and it is a history of my family's work as having a commercial banana farm in the Caribbean, and what happens to agriculture and food security in the climate crisis. So this was a really, really personal project for me. And it was really fun to put together as a asynchronous talk instead of doing a regular Zoom talk, because it's quite interactive. And so there will be links for all of these available that you can browse through at your time. But I wanted to spend today talking a little bit about climate inequality in the Caribbean and how we got here, right? This is a picture of my neighborhood. I grew up in a small a village called Maho. It is what we call in Dominica perspective, it's kind of like a mid-size suburban community that is working upwardly mobile, working and middle-class people. And this is the picture of Maho right the day after Hurricane Maria hit in 2017. This is what it looked like in our neighborhood. You can see an image in the back. That is the school, the elementary school, the primary school, and the grounds. And I just wanted to highlight why a place like Maho could have all of this devastation. It was not one of the worst hit, but it was quite significantly harmed. And it is the site of our lab project that we're working on. And I wanted to focus on it for a little bit. So one of the projects I didn't show you is a project we started in 2015 called Maroon Country. And Maroon Country has the students go into the archives and look at slave registers, correspondence between the government the Crown and the local government, and talking about how Dominica has one of the strongest and longest settlement of Maroons in slave history in the Caribbean. And there was a major war in 1814 where the Maroons lost that war finally to the British. And before that, they had occupied lands as you can see, in the mountains, where it was very easy for them to hide for multiple generations. And I started working with the students on this project because I wanted them to understand the relationship between slavery and colonialism and environmental justice and injustice, right? I think there's a story here that is really important to tell, that things didn't happen like this in the last 20 years. This has been, colonialism is environmental injustice. And I wanted to be able to draw that to the students' attention in some critical ways. I remember when I taught a class at Trinity called Ethics and Social Change in Global Literature. And this is a topic we talked about quite often when we spoke. Most of the students who took that class were nursing students, and we talked about this quite often in the literature that we read about how this type of colonialism and the legacies of colonialism and slavery were impacting healthcare and the health crisis. And this is a very similar model we're talking about in the environment. So wait, something is happening. Of course, it's technology. Right. So this is the community before Maria. And this is a picture of the neighborhood from, I took most of the pictures you see here. These are just different perspectives of the neighborhood that you can see. And the one you saw in the devastation was from the sea. I now live in Jamaica, but I was in Dominica in 2017 when the hurricane happened. And so I frequently tell people I am a survivor of climate disaster in some interesting ways. I was in Dominica both in 2015 and 2017. And it is a reality of my life as much as it is a reality of my work. And so this gives you a perspective of where things happen. I want to talk about this particular image. In this image at the top right is of a 1765 map by John Byers. He was a cartographer who did maps in the Caribbean. And this highlights the areas that were designated for different plantation owners / slave owners in that era. And all of these lands, this is the area in Dominica. This is the stretch of land where Maho is right now. This is a similar stretch of land. I will talk to you about this map. In this area, what happened in the colonial era, I would say during the British Empire, is that lands were sold across most of the countries, and then around the coastline, they had what they call the King's or the Queen's three chains, depending on who was in the monarch at the time. And that refers to a portion of land, I think it's 66 meters stretching out from the coast that goes inland, that was left for the crown, right? So land could not be sold according to the law from 66 meters coming from the coast into inland. And then everything after that was for sale to settlers, colonial settlers. And so this area you see, I think it's a little exaggerated here on the coast, but I wanted to highlight that coast. So most of this area, Maho had three main plantation areas, as you see highlighted there. This is Hereford Estate, this is the Belfast Estate, and this is Curry's Rest Estate. These were the three main plantations. The various crops were grown there, including sugar at one point, but sugar wasn't a big crop for Dominica for a long time. And after slavery ended in 1830, between 1833 and 1838, we had different dates and moves towards manumission. Most of the enslaved people who were settled on those lands had nowhere to go. So they were forced in a lot of ways to either stay on the property and continue to work under conditions of slavery for the plantation owners, or they moved all into the Queen's three chains, right? So most people moved from the estates into fine settlements in the Queen's three chains because this was crown land and this is where they were directed to go. And then they basically had to go back and work or rent property to plant crops or work for almost nothing on these same plantations. And so the settlement pattern on the coast, as you will see in most of Dominica, is really dense and this is something, if you've ever been to a Caribbean island, especially in the Eastern Caribbean, you'll notice this pattern of settlement on the coast. And this is why. This is after Hurricane Maria. This is the same school you saw from an aerial view. This is my house. This is the property where my house was after the hurricane, my childhood home. And these are some properties in my neighborhood that were near the shore. So I'm just giving you different shots of what happened after Hurricane Maria. It hit Dominica in 2017 as a Category 5 hurricane, and it stayed over Dominica, covering the entire island for 8 hours. Destruction was 90% of the land, and dozens of people died. It was quite intense. And then in 2015, before that I was mentioning, we also had a storm, a tropical storm Erica, which brought 20 inches of rainfall in 6 hours. And the waterways caused major destruction in places. As you saw in the topographical map, there's water everywhere in Dominica. And so most of the destruction was around mudslides and landslides. And in one community, lost about 35 people died from the result of a landslide into the sea. So it's been quite a decade for Dominica in terms of climate crisis. This is a reality, this is a living reality. We live 6 months preparing for the hurricane season and then 6 months holding our breath that we don't get a big storm. This is really what the pattern has been. And the communities hit hardest are in those post-enslavement settlements, communities that settle along riverways, along the coast, of course, and are most densely populated. And so what we want to do with this project is to really think about how we can include the community in a vision of this rebuilding that includes the things about the community that are culturally rich, that are historically rich, but also imagining that we exist in the future. A lot of the news about the Caribbean is how we are the most vulnerable. We have yes, all of those things are true, but it also is really dystopian to say that it's likely we will not be here. What does that mean, right? What does that mean to not imagine yourself or your legacy in the future? And so part of the project of Great Caribbean is to reinforce this idea that there are Black people in the future. We are in the future, we are here now. There are Caribbean people, there are Indigenous people in the future. Dominica has a large active Indigenous population, and one of the last surviving Indigenous populations in the region. And it's really important as it's part of our national political and socioeconomic life to be inclusive of Indigenous people and Indigenous life in our work. In fact, Maho is an Indigenous, a Kalinago name for a type of tree. So it's in every part of our life, and we want to make sure that those parts of our cultural heritage are preserved. And so the community, I wanted to make a connection, one, between the past and the present, but also the current socioeconomic crises that are both a result of and a factor in environmental and climate injustice, like the density of the population. We're talking about issues with crime, sexual assault, alcoholism, and the lab, as one of the most famous places in Maho, which is like a rum shop, is where the project is named after. And I wanted to be able to have the students think about how does this space impact how people feel about their environment? How does gathering at a watering hole shift your perspective about life? And how is that a result of the environmental factors that you have to endure on a day-to-day basis? And so this is part of the work that is happening in the lab project. I don't have time to show you all of the parts of it, but I do want to show you a still of what's happening in the mapping of the project. I don't think I turned my timer on. So I'm just not sure how much time I have. So this is the area brought forward here. I already showed you the historical layer. We have several layers on this map. The yellow one refers to the commercial sectors. This commercial area used to be a very important waterway for family life, but now it's completely industrial. There are companies, car shops, wholesale gas, what you call it, one of those those natural gas pipelines runs around this place. So there, and this has the estate for rum making and soap making from the old Belfast estate. It still exists here. So this is a space of incredible commercial activity, but also pollution is happening in this waterway. We also have the marine life. Maho is a major fishing community, and we wonder what's happening to the fishing community when we have a major commercial industry here. There's not as much agriculture anymore in this community, and so we're wondering what will happen to the agriculture here. And we are looking also at specific places. You'll see some of the sociocultural issues of density that we're pointing to in this cluster here, where we have issues related to drugs, crime, alcoholism, sexual assault in this neighborhood, in this area, that is a direct result of overcrowding and poor facilities, poor infrastructure. And Dennis Farley has a very good question. I hope I can get to it later. It's a very good question. The lands are actually owned by this. This is where my family now lives, in Hereford Estate, which we call Jimmy. This was turned into a housing, a sort of middle-class housing suburb. This area is still owned by a family. This is the Belfast Estate it's housing, but it's also property owned by a Syrian Lebanese family that were immigrants at the turn of the century. And they own the company, the manufacturing company, where most people in the community have been employed my entire life, for about 2 or 3 generations. So this is from the owners of the Belfast Estate. The family came and bought this land. And then this one, it has turned into more agricultural land and more settlement. So we have, we still have sort of a monopoly on ownership in the neighborhood and creating employment for most of the people who live there. So there is a time for that. There's a space, there's a lot to talk about in terms of the property ownership here. But the one thing I wanted to highlight is what we did is we went to the community and we interviewed 15 people who live in the neighborhood. We identified them. My family members are part of these interviews from different sectors, different walks of life: fishermen, shop owners, parents, sports enthusiasts. We sat with them. All the students took tours with them in the community. So we asked them to do walking interviews, where they took a walk in their favorite places or just walked around the neighborhood while asking them the questions and recording the interviews. The oral histories, we asked them 5 questions. What was it like growing up for you? What do you really love about the community? What are how did Hurricane Maria specifically impact you and your life? What things would you want to keep if we were to redesign the neighborhood, and what things would you really want to see changed? It was just these 5 questions. And it turned out to be some rich oral histories that we collected. And so for each of the stories, we are creating basically GIS layers, and we're doing 3D modeling of each of them. So we're doing walking tours for each person and their story, but we're also using the information to do some analysis and redesign this neighborhood with with a possibility of what will this look like if we take what the community wants into consideration. I will be adding my own story. Since I grew up in this neighborhood, I'm still very connected to my community. I prefer to live there than anywhere else when I'm in Dominica. And what can it look like that includes all of the things that we want, and has all of the features and still responds to the reality of a changing climate. And one of the things that we're using as our methodology is thinking about Kamal Brathwaite. Of course, I'm going literary and theoretical here, and thinking about his Caribbean cosmologies. And he has these 12 cosmology things that are sort of from African and plantation life for people of African descent. And we're using these as sort of signposts to help guide us into thinking about what the community needs. So this is the project in progress, and I'll be happy when it is done, hopefully by this summer, to show to everyone. This is what happens in the classroom and in the spaces we have for digital humanities pedagogy to do all of the projects that you just saw. we have them think about method, form, and audience. Our audience is always public. It always includes every type of person who has access or who we want to create access for. We really want them to think about the possibilities of digital technology. It's always about community inclusivity, and we do something called minimal computing, which is to reduce our electronic and digital footprint by using less bandwidth, having it accessible through mobile phones. And this is really the core of the work that happens at Create Caribbean. So this is all for me. We'll have time in the questions, and thank you for listening, and I'm happy to be here.
Great, thank you, Schuyler. We're going to move on to Margarita next.
Thank you. I am going to try to share my screen. I'm so glad to be here. Thank you guys for inviting me. So I will be presenting, as Dr. Pietrobon said, on my work that I did with Toxic Free NC as a community health and justice organizer. Some of you may know me, some of you may not. My name is Margarita Vasquez Martinez. I am a former Trinity alum, so I'm very happy to be back, as I said. I do want to say, though, that I'm not a data analyst. I'm not a scientist. Some of the things that I will say, maybe I'm like, I don't know all of it, but you know, I am a previous farm worker, and so I will be speaking to you from my personal experiences, and also like stories that I learned from community members that share with me while I was doing this work, going out in the fields and giving information about pesticides and chemical exposure. And so all of these things is what I learned while I was doing community health and justice organizer. This past summer, I spent my whole summer basically from like April till October in the fields of North Carolina. And so I've seen firsthand like what environmental racism does to people, people of color especially. And but as I said, I experienced this as a farm worker. And so while I was in charge of educating farm workers and community members on the implications of pesticides and harmful chemicals, I kind of was like shocked that I was like, I've never really thought or stopped to ask like, you know, what is the implication of the food that I'm eating? Who is impacted by this? And like, I when we go to the store, we just pick up an apple and we're like, well, wow, you never really think about how does that come about? How do you get this broccoli or this blueberry to your grocery store? And this is you know, where farm workers come. And you know, so talking about these toxic chemicals, if you've ever eaten an apple, broccoli, or any number of fruits and vegetables that are grown in the US, you have definitely been exposed to toxic chemicals and pesticides that are used in our crops. But we never really wonder, well, I never really wondered, like if these pesticides can kill weeds, insects, and all this, like what does it do to our body? And like who is getting affected and who's doing something about it, right? And so as you can see here, this is a picture of me with the farm workers. This is H2A workers. It's a visa program that we have that comes every year, and they work on our fields, and I was repping my Trinity shirt. So I don't know, before we start, I would like to know, or maybe if you guys can drop in the chat, if any of you want to, if you've ever heard of pesticides before, prior to like just me giving like a little spiel of 5 minutes here. You guys want to post it in the chat? Maybe not. Let's see. Well, we'll just hope you guys write something in there. But pesticides are an enormous group of chemical substances. They're used to kill weeds, rodents, fungi, and like so other pests that we call in the farm work, like in the ag culture. So these chemicals are mainly delivered to their targeted area by spray, by plane, tractors, or people spraying them by hand, as you can see illustrated in the pictures right here. So the pesticides have, oh, the chat's disabled. Okay, got it. So these pesticides have the potential to harm the nervous system, the reproductive system, and the endocrine system, which is something that I learned like last year. I was like, what is endocrine system? So this is the reproductive system. Well, this is the system that really regulates your whole body. And it, like the different hormones and the concept, like it's literally from your conception to your adulthood, and this is what receives all these toxic in the chemical, right? I mean, in it, like the chemicals that are coming into your body. So you know, as we will go into later, like as you can see here, this is just getting sprayed everywhere at the right side. Like, you know, you can't really just say that you're spraying this crops and that's the only place you'll see it, right? And then also I will just touch a little bit on CAFOs, which is a concentrated animal feeding operation, and this is an industrial sized livestock operation. I was learning a little more about this, but I didn't get to work that much on this, but it's something that I was really shocked when I took this this basically they call it toxic tour in North Carolina. And we got to see like this community closer to like the border of South Carolina and North Carolina, where if you see on the bottom right here, there's like these pink pools, and there's like this little tins, and that is pig feces and urine. And so these are basically huge hog farms that are found mainly in these rural areas where people of color mainly live. And so I don't know if you ever driven in the countryside, but sometimes you pass and there's like an awful smell. Many of the times it will be this. It would be the CAFOs, like the place where they have the urine, the feces just sitting there before they spray it. So our Kefir River has the highest concentration of CAFOs on the planet. This is our biggest river in North Carolina. There are 10 million hogs, 16 million turkeys, and 300 million chickens are produced annually in our Kefir River. So that means like all of their like waste goes into our water. The pollution discharge from both the swine and the poultry. CAFOs is enormous. Of these discharges contain nutrients such as nitrogen, phosphorus, heavy metals such as copper, toxic gases such as methane, ammonia, and deadly bacteria such as MRSA and salmonella. So these are like not treated. They're just put out there in our water. And then that affects our animal lives. Like the animals that live in the river can't basically live anymore. Animals that drink from the river die. You know, it's polluting our soil there, the air that people breathe around the area. Like people can't even go outside without smelling that. So the majority of the people that live here are BIPOC people and Native Americans, and it's been a problem in the area. You know, just going to see and smell that, it was really awful. So that's something that I really wanted to highlight a little bit before I started on what I was actually working on, which was pesticides. So pesticides, we find them like anywhere. As I said, we find them everywhere. It's in our air. Same thing with the CAFOs. It's found in our air, in our food, in our water, because you can't really spray, as you saw with the aerial sprays, that you either spray it by nozzle, you can spray it with tractors, or you can spray it with helicopter. It's supposed to be sprayed when the wind is low, usually when it's like early in the morning or at night. Nobody's supposed to get there, like nobody should be there when it's being sprayed. But you know, even though with the slightest movement of air, this travels, so it doesn't go in its concentrated area. It will be all over the place in people's yards, people that are not even like you know, part of this agriculture or farm. And so I think you will be shocked to learn that the top well, the Working Environment Group has a dirty dozen, and the top, you know, 12, one of my favorites is strawberry. These are the ones that have the highest level of pesticide residue on them. Spinach, kale, nectarine, apples are the top 5. The things that we eat the most have pesticides on them, and some of them actually, like even though you wash them, even though you peel them, they still have like that pesticides has like seeped in it. So there's kind of like no getting like around it besides buying organic food. And in the US, nearly 70% of the non-organic fresh produce sold in the contains residues of potentially harmful chemicals. So that's a big number. And while I, when I was learning about this, I came about this quote that you see on the screen that's innocent until proven guilty should be for people, not chemicals. And you hear that a lot, and yeah, and like the justice system, where you're like, no, this person is innocent until they're proven guilty. And I realize in the US that developers like that big ag, the EPA, and others have this approach when it comes to regulating chemicals. They basically are like, we will put it out there and see what it does. Instead of studying the effects of these chemicals before approving them for use. I think it just made sense. I was always like, what do you mean? Like they have some of the studies, but they're going to wait until they see what harm it does to maybe take it off the market. So as of 2021, the EPA has registered about 86,000 chemicals. So that is a very expansive list. I will go over two that I find like extremely worrisome, and it's what I found a lot when we were going to talk to farm workers. And as I said, I am not a scientist. It's just what I learned, like when I was talking to farm workers and hearing about their problems and what was something that they were experiencing, and seeing people that lived around the area saying that, they can't drink their water anymore because it's been contaminated with chemicals. And so I was asking, like, what's out there? Like, why are they not able to drink their water? Why are people getting sick? And so one of the first chemicals that I want to talk to you is about neonics or neonicotinoids. So they kill insects through a neurological pathway that also exists in human. So about 70% of our crop, yields better if they're like being visited by pollinators. But this neonicotinoid has developmental or neurological effects, and it may include malformations of a developing heart and brain. So women that are pregnant are at higher risk. It also, causes people to be on the autism spectrum disorder, and a cluster of symptoms including memory loss and finger tremors. So that's what it does to people, and that's mainly our farm workers and kids. But it is also, absorbed plants that can be present in pollen and nectar. And I don't know if you know, but the main pollinators are bees and butterflies. So as I said, 75% of our crop produce better yields if animals help them pollinate. So we are getting rid of our pollinators. So that sounds like a problem. That sounds like a food problem. They visit over 90% of the world's 107 crops, 107 crops, but they're not the only pollinators. As I said, with like, it's not just butterflies, it's not just bees, it's all these other animals that come and are considered pests in this ag culture. And now we're creating superbugs because we're spraying a lot more because we're trying to get rid of this and that, and they become resistant to it. So there's like, how much more can you spray till you are like done? And like, what is going to be of us when it comes to eating our food and people's safety? In North Carolina, we were trying to work with people in the area that could create pollinator gardens, which I think is a very elitist thing because not everybody has a garden in the first place. But, people that could, we were going out to the community and trying to tell them, can you create a pollinator garden, which is just bringing like milkweed, which is something that's considered a weed, which it is, but, it helps the pollinator. So they were being killed off with the pesticides. So we were asking people to create pollinator gardens so that they can help with the pollinators in the area and increase our numbers. With the monarch butterflies, their numbers have gone really low, and their population has dropped dramatically. And the same thing with bees. Another one is chlorpyrifos. This is it belongs to the same family as Obsterian gas, and that like known as organophosphates. And I don't know if you ever heard of organophosphate, but they were first developed by the Nazis for warfare in World War II. So I don't know if you let that sink in right for a bit. It was used to kill people in war. And here we are using it on our crops. We're using it to grow our crops. We knew the Nazis were terrible, so I don't know why they thought it was a great idea to use this on our crops. But it was very inexpensive and it was effective, and it has been on the market since 1965. But it has been linked to prenatal and early exposure to people that have been exposed have been linked with prenatal and early exposure, like developmental delays, lower IQs, learning deficiency, smaller infant birth weight and length, and persistent neurological problems with children. In California, this is a big problem, and in North Carolina as well, I would say. But people a lot of people live in farms, and they're being exposed to this. A lot of them have kids that have ADHD or like attention spans that are very short. And so that was a problem with them over there. There's a study, if you guys want to check it out, it's called Chamacos, which is CHAMACOS, Chamaco Studies. And they did a study in the Valley of California where they try to they follow pregnant women, pregnant farm workers, and people in the community. And they're still it's like the longest running studies. They have 7, I think it's like 20 years now. I mean, and we really were like seeing this study where they were like trying to see what kids after they were born, they were like 4 or 5 years old, and they're looking at kids that were not exposed to pesticides and looking at the developmental delays. And like it was a picture, like the kid that was exposed like just kind of had like little squiggles, and a kid that was not exposed had like a full-on drawing that you could see. And so that's one where you start to see it, right? Like the environmental justice, it's like mainly like people that are of color, migrants that come here that live in those areas instead of like the suburbs. And so in last year we had a win in October. The EPA, like the court ordered the EPA to follow with its findings before the Trump administration to end the use of chlorpyrifos. It was banned in the 2000s as for housing use because it was deemed unsafe for kids. So I don't know if any of you guys use RAID. That was part of it. But it was still used for like farming. So I guess like the life of farm workers didn't really matter to the EPA and big ag. But actually, as of this past month, as of February 25, the EPA said they would end the use of chemicals on crops. So that's a big win for people working in this field right now. And like I said, who is affected by all of this, right? Mainly is children and farm workers, because farm workers, live to like work in this areas, and they many of the times live close to the area, so they kind of never get out of this. OSHA in North Carolina is supposed to be doing all the training on this, but while I was doing outreach, there's so many of these farms that are so far away from big communities, and they're so hidden that you kind of have to be from that area to know where they're at. And many of the times that I ask farm workers, I'm like, did you get pesticides training? Like, did you know like how to protect yourself? And they were like, yeah, someone came, but it was in English, and a lot of them only spoke Spanish. They don't have access to healthcare because they're so far away. Some of them are undocumented, so they it's very hard to go free to get healthcare if you're undocumented. And a lot of them don't have any time off because this is their full-time job. If they take a day off, a lot of the employers are like, well, we can find someone else if you don't want to come. And as I said, their immigration status, they really have no leverage in this. Second is us, like people that live close to these factories, close to these agriculture center, people that bought their homes in the area thinking that they were going to retire in that, or people that have had homes there and like, during the slavery times or during plantation times, and that their family stayed in those areas. And, now, especially with the hog farming in Red Springs, it's a community, as I said, closer to South Carolina, it's called Duplin County. If you want to know a little more, a lot of them are experiences a lot of health problems, and they're trying to mobilize. They're trying to make conscious on the legislators, but what they're trying to tell everyone is like, we need to bring the young kids. When we did this, they were talking about, they already did this the movement before with the civil rights movement, and they were like, that's when we were young. The older people use the kids to do this, and we need to bring our young kids to do this work and know like the effects that it's having in our community, because a lot of them are sick and can't breathe the air, can't drink. There's some people that have had the privilege of being able to leave the area, but they're still like, that's my home and I can't return because I'm dying, like if I stay here. And also consumers, and I forgot to write, like, obviously the environment, but as consumers, we are, eating this food that's highly sprayed with pesticides, and we have a say so in it, but sometimes we don't. But yeah, like I guess the biggest loser, or the person that's most affected, or like what is most affected is the environment. And prior to coming to this work, I always questioned what was environmental justice. I was like, this is just like such a big word. Like, what do you mean environmental justice? And I learned that it's just a fancier word for saying like, you actually have the right to have a life that you don't have to worry about food. You don't have to worry about getting sick when you drink your water, about having clean soil, about having clean air. I come from an indigenous community in Oaxaca, and although I immigrated to the US when I was a young kid, I still remember a lot of like the practices that my parents did, where we grew our own food. We grew as much as we needed for that season, and we didn't grow a lot more. And I guess that's also a privilege to say that, we were able to grow our own food and knew where our food came from. We knew what our food looked like. But that's one of the big things that Big Ag says, well, if we don't grow with all the sprays, with all these toxic chemicals on the water or on the food, then we won't have enough food for the whole world to feed, but I think if we just stop supporting these big agricultural companies, we could make an effect on people's lives that live in this area, and also like on the environment. And then, as I just wanted to say, like a couple of things that you could do. This is I think like scary stuff when I first listened to it. It was just, like things that I feel like, just to support your local farm workers, support organizations, and learn a little bit more. But I will just wrap up there, and thank you guys for your time. I appreciate it.
Great. Thank you both, Schuyler and Margarita. I think we'll do it this way. You two have access to the Q&A button in Zoom, where you can see the questions coming in from our Zoom attendees. There's also a good audience in the room here. So if you have questions, feel free, just stand up and go to one of the mics, and then all cut in, and then students in the room can ask questions to you as well, even though you can't see them directly. So if you want to get started with some of the Zoom questions, maybe we'll go to Schuyler first, and then I'll jump in if anyone comes from the room.
Sure, thank you. I saw Dennis had a question, and then Sita had a good question that I wanted to address first, and then I saw President McGuire had some questions at the end there. So I'll just do those quickly. So Dennis, you were asking about, could the town expand inland and be less susceptible to damage from the sea? That's already happening. Most people are building up on the hills, and most expansion is happening that way. But the problem is more cultural and historical than that. Property ownership and home ownership is such a big part of the identity. Land and land ownership is such a big part of the identity of Caribbean people. And part of the problem, especially in villages, Maho is probably not as high risk as the others. But one of the issues is that most people in those high-risk areas do not want to move. In a community we call Petit Savan, that where the landslide happened and 35 people died, the government basically decided to, condemn that community for a number of reasons, after environmental assessment and all kinds of infrastructural assessments. and people refuse to move. Part of it is really, really cultural. There is a certain relationship to the land that developers, policymakers, activists, environmental workers have to take into account when dealing with those issues. And that is the hardest part, getting people to leave the coastline. You know, my grandparents have a house on the coastline. My cousins still live in that house. And despite all our attempts during the hurricane to tell them, you need to move, the day of the hurricane, 2 of them decided to stay in the house. And a lot of it was attachment to the space, right? So what do we do about the more sentimental, the more historical and cultural attachments we have to our homes, our lands? I see this conversation on the news all the time. We saw this conversation in Katrina. Why did people not relocate? These are conversations that happen every time you're dealing with, and it's always, I also want to put in there how, because we're talking about race and racism, how that conversation is usually racialized and framed around class as well. You know, can people afford to move? Can people afford these relocations? What happens to their stability? The government built new homes for people moving from Petit Savan, and all of these homes were sort of like apartment homes. These people were farmers and used to having their backyard gardens, and their entire way of life changed moving into like an apartment complex. It was just not the same. You think about all of these factors and how they play into reluctance and hesitance about relocation. It does present a problem for the government. It does present a problem for people who want to do have a real impact in that way. So it's not, this is a longer issue to reckon with, I think. So I hope that answers your question. Sita was asking about DH skills and tools our students will need to map oral history. So there are various tools that you can use for that. One of the things, well, the most important tool is, I think, for students is telling students that technology doesn't do the work. You have to be able to understand research methods. You have to understand the ethics of doing research in communities. I think it's important for us to still bring our academic lenses and our training and all of the important things about the conversation around ethics and working with communities to the table, and encouraging that conversation in the classroom first and ensuring that the students have those skills. From a tools perspective, there are some open source, very easy tools, even for instructors who may not have a lot of tech savvy or be sort of DH practitioners themselves. Northwestern University has a suite called Night Lab, Night with a K, and they are very, very easy mapping and timeline tools that you can use on the interface. If you have a Google account, you just log in with your Google account and it saves everything for you. It's quite easy to play around with. I teach it at summer camp to students ages like 11 to 15. So I know that it's quite accessible for a college level classroom, and the students can do a lot of work in mapping just in there, and they can do their own like very specific mapping. They don't need a lot of technology, but if you have the means, we use ArcGIS to do a lot of our mapping, and then we have Omeka, which is more of an archive and library tool that has mapping features on it, and that is open source as well. So just to give you some of those, I can always write to you, Sita, with a list or send it to you. And then I had one more question. I saw one more question. Yes, so President McGuire was asking about doing a research internship. Absolutely. I want to use this opportunity to say that Craig Caribbean was just awarded, as part of the Caribbean Digital Scholarship Collective, $5 million for 4 years with Columbia University, University of Miami, Barnard College, and the University of Puerto Rico to do Caribbean Digital Scholarship in the Caribbean for the next 4 years. It's a great opportunity for us. It does encourage us to build partnerships in the higher education, higher learning funding category. And so we do want to continue to build relationships with other colleges to do this kind of work. What it does offer in terms of funding opportunities for instructors is that you will be able to soon apply for a micro grant if you are a faculty member or even a student who's doing work in digital humanities or wants to do work in digital humanities, and you have a project, you will be able to apply for some of those funds to do that. But if there are other funds that we can develop a more robust partnership to do environmental justice work with Craig Caribbean, I'm quite open to that. So we can follow up on that at any time. And so I will let Margarita answer some questions.
Thank you. I am seeing a couple of questions. The first one, I'm sorry, I did not see a name. It just says KMC. And it was like, what would an approach to reach out to local health authorities and advocacy groups, I guess, work? That is going on already right now. We had a partnership with North Carolina State University, Chapel Hill, and a couple other orgs. Our organization was like basically science-based, but it's really hard to get into these people that have been practicing, like farming forever, and that's all they want to do it that way, and they think that doing it organically or on a smaller scale doesn't work. So I think the fact base is there. It's just that some people don't really want to listen to you. When I was doing outreach to farm workers, I saw a lot of signs that were like, "Do not come. We have guns here," and it's just like that's the mentality that's there for those farmers as well. And so the next one is like, what are the trade-offs here? I saw a couple of, if we didn't use pesticides, and like, would we be able to grow our own food? We always think, for me, this is just my opinion. But I was reading, we always think that we will not be able to grow enough food or without using these chemicals. There are a lot of farms actually that are already using, I think it's more of an integrated farming practice, that they're diversifying their farming, because they're not just planting just corn at the same time. They're planting soybeans, they're planting like a bunch of other crops at the same time. And so that gives them, some of these pests are more attracted to this, but that plant doesn't die off if the pest is there. So that's one thing that we have been, talking more about, that people should just diversify their crops, not just use it for monoculture, I think is the word, when they're just using one crop at a time to grow. So that's one thing that we're saying. And also, like, small scale is fine. Like, we don't, like, every country or every state, I feel like, should have enough land to be able to provide for that community that they're in, but we always overgrow, and therefore we have such a huge amount of wasted food and crops, so that's one thing that we could be looking at. Let's see, I think I addressed the, are organic farming methods feasible on a large scale enough to replace current methods? So that's when I was like, it doesn't have to necessarily be like organic, or it doesn't have to be what we think of organic, just like not spraying and just growing one. It can be this growing a bunch of crops at the same time, which also helps people with yield, and also being able to grow more than one crop at the same time. And the optimal level of pesticides, while I was at Toxic Free NC, we really wanted to advocate for zero pesticides. There's really no safe level for pesticides for people, even at, especially for farm workers, because farm workers are exposed to this. And so they, even though it's a small dose, they come in every day, and that's an accumulation of their body. So I don't think there's a thing where our body can tolerate that. So we honestly said no, like there's no such thing as a safe level of pesticides. And as I said, insects and pests, they can be dealt with other ways, as diversifying your crops. How do we know what pesticides are being grown on our local farms? Honestly, we don't really know unless you go out there and talk to the farmers themselves and like, hey, what are you spraying on here? And small local farms, usually they don't really spray, but in huge farms, they do have these things. But I honestly wouldn't be able to tell you, like, how do you know in your local farm, since I was usually working with these huge farms. And well, I guess I will say that one thing you will know is if you smell some things, if you're out in the country and you go to the farms and you smell like some really like toxic, like you can smell toxic chemicals in the air, then it's being sprayed with pesticides. And what would be my proposal? And that's what my proposal is. We really looked at, trying to diversify and using, there are some pesticides that are not toxic, and so some of those things could be used on these crops, but mainly we try to tell people, you know, to diversify their crops, and if they do have to use pesticides, to be more conscientious of the people that are being affected, of the methods and how they're spraying it. So that's one thing that we were really advocating for. And who are some of the big companies that may need advocacy? Right now, NRDC has been doing a lot of work. We work with NRDC to try to help pass or help push the EPA to pass this ban the chlorpyrifos. Toxic Free NC is also working on right now on a heat stress bill for farm workers, and that is also exacerbating the effects of these pesticides, because a lot of people spraying have to wear these thermal cloths, or like this plastic cloths, and now because the temperature is rising, people can't really protect themselves anymore, because they will like pass out if they go out to spray in these plastic clothes, or like the protective gear. So that's one thing that we're trying to, you know, pass with Toxic Free NC. If you guys want to give that the page a look, or if you can support them in any way, sharing their posts, signing letters, but definitely NRDC is who we work with the most. The NC, I think it's Water Alliance, or the Water Keepers in North Carolina. They're doing a lot of work because of our all the toxics found in our kefir. They're doing a big work over there, and that's actually a community that's very what would I say, privileged. Wilmington, North Carolina is a big water, coastal town, so there's a lot of rich people there. So, you know, but if you guys want to learn more about this problem, you can look them up. You can really just search CAPOS and see like all the work that's being done in North Carolina to protect our waterways. And I think
we've got just a few more minutes. I want to see if anyone from the room, yeah, you want to go up to the mic there? We've got one coming in from the room here.
Can you hear me? Okay. So, I enjoyed your presentations very well, both of you. I saw a similarity between you both take really good points of accountability to your cause, as in Ms. Vasquez, you talked about supporting local organizations and going out and asking the workers. So as with you, Doctor, you went out to do surveys to actually ask the community how it would look if people actually took initiative and cared about, you know, certain environmental justices that happen in your community. I just have a question of, which you spoke about a little bit, Ms. Vasquez. It was, do you see any future hope in future legislation on any bills or any supports that you want them to improve on? Like, have you spoke to your local governors, mayors, or anybody? Have you reached out? I'd just like to know, what initiatives have you taken on?
Yeah, thank you. I didn't catch your name, but when I was in North Carolina, I did advocate and lobby. Well, we were working with policymakers and trying to get them to pass legislation. Actually, Toxic Free NC got some things changed, and this is on a small level, you know, for a state, like it was just a statewide thing, but we got them for people that were exposed to pesticides, people that spoke English. There was a link for them to report that, but there was nothing in Spanish for people to be able to report, and it's really hidden on the Department of Labor's website. And so we got them to change that. We got them to make this more visible and like have it at the top of your page, and also have it in Spanish, and have someone to be able to take that report, so that, you know, it's because, you know, mainly, as I said, the people that are being exposed to this is like farm workers and Latinos in the area, and they don't speak English, and so they're also scared to report. So we made them change that to like, it's not necessary to put your name, it's not necessary to put any contact, that you should just go out and like see what the reporting was, if there was a toxic exposure, and that these people didn't follow the regulations, that the DOL would send someone out there, an inspector, to see what's going on. And this past, before I left Toxic Free NC, we were working with this a heat stress bill, and we were working with the community. So we brought, you know, a lot of people say that they're working with the community, but they're really not working with the community. We brought people that were farm workers to be at the beginning of this process, not at the end, not to tell us like, what do you think about this that we've drafted that we think is good for you? We ask them, what do you want in this bill to protect yourself, and how do you want it to be presented to these legislators? And so we brought them on, they were getting paid, they're getting paid. And so the next step is that they finished drafting the bill. Now the next thing is they're going to take it to the legislator to try to propose it, and hopefully it will pass. We're thinking that it probably won't in the first round, but you know, everyone's very like has been working hard at this and is trying to push legislation no matter what. You know, what I really loved was that the farm workers were always like, if we don't get it this time, we will get it next time, and if we don't get it next time, we will come back until it passes.
We have time for one more from the room if anyone wants to. There's one more coming in from the room, and then we'll bring it to a conclusion after this.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Verona Chambers, and my question to you, doctor, is with all these pesticides and all the negative effects that it have both on children and the health of other, like the water, the air and stuff that is polluting other people, is there any way that these effects can be prevented other than using these pesticides that is so harmful? Have you guys come up with anything that, you know, you could use instead of these harmful stuff?
I think that would might have been for me. I do want to correct you. I'm not a doctor. I hope to be a doctor one day, but I don't have the answers. The only thing, as I said, or one thing that I focused was on the ending of monocrops, or just using that one thing, that one land, and growing one thing on it. But also we have a lot of power in like that we allow these companies to keep going on in doing this harm to the communities, especially when it comes to like CAFOs, like the hog farms and the chicken. North Carolina has more of these animals than they have human people living in the state of North Carolina. And that is because there's a huge demand on basically poultry. And I think if we consume more locally, we would be able to, like, you know, step on these people's pocket and stop them from, you know, making so much money off of our communities. And also, what was the other thing I was going to say? I forgot my train of thought, but yeah, like there's really not much that I know. That's all that we've been talking about, just trying to get people to use these things less and diversify their crops.
Okay, I must say thank you to both of you speakers who have spoken earlier on your effort, the energy, the time, and the interest that you have all been putting into trying to get this thing fixed, because it does not only affect just the animals and it's affecting the whole world if you think about it, because it's in the air, it's in the water, it's everywhere. And medical attention is not that prevalent for most people. So for a lot of people, it's fatal.
It is.
And
really
I greatly appreciate what you guys are doing, and I pray that, you know, you will be successful in the end, and your hard work will make a difference. Thank you, ma'am.
Thank you.
I also want to thank both Schuyler and Margarita. That is unfortunately all the time we have for this panel. But if we can give a round of quiet applause, you might be able to hear that in the room.